So Helen was the face that launched 1,000 ships. But was she really? So one of my all-time favorite books is the Iliad. The Iliad was the first book that I read that was really my introduction into literature. I had always read growing up, but until I came across the Iliad, I had never really read literature. Interestingly enough, it was a film that I have issues with that caused me to read the Iliad. So the 2004 film Troy, I liked it a lot in the theater, and there's still some things I appreciate about it. I think they did I've been a martial artist my whole life. I thought they did a really good job in the fight choreography. I know they put a lot of detail into the sets. I think all the actors did a good job. I just have a lot of problems with what they did with the screenplay. I feel very strongly that if you have if you're going to tell a story and you're going to put your own spin on it completely, and you're going to the extent that you're really going to ignore details from the original that are really important, just change the names of the characters, make it a fictional place, and put a footnote that it's very loosely based off of something that's been around for thousands of years, that people will still be talking about thousands of years after, or at least hundreds of years after no one's watching your film. You can guess how I feel about this. The movie did cause me to read the Iliad. Now, I have to say that when I read the Iliad the first time, I was really confused because the movie diverts from it a lot. I'm not going to go on a big thing about that today, although I think sometime I am going to do some videos on why so many movies are terrible. But what I want to get into today is the events that actually led up to the Iliad. In the 2004 film Troy, Helen is depicted as a very young, innocent girl who's forced to marry this womanizing, belligerent king, Menelaus. The problem with that is, in the mythology, in the legends, in everything we actually know about the events that led up to the Greeks invading Troy, Helen was part of the Spartan royal family. And what happened, and you can kind of debate if it was all real, if it was all myth. I'm not getting into that today. I have my own opinions about that. I know some scholars think that it's all just fiction, but that's not important today. According to the information we have, Helen was part of the Spartan royal family, and it was time for her to get married. So all the eligible princes from all the city states in Greece, bearing in mind that Greece was not a country at that time, you had a bunch of individual city states. Some of them were probably quite small, but everyone who had enough wealth and enough power to be eligible went to Sparta. They participated in games, and they were trying to basically kind of put forth their case that they were the best suited to be the king of Sparta. This Sparta was a bit different than the Sparta a lot of us probably think of, because this was before, like, Hergos gave the Spartans the law that created the Agoge and a lot of other things that are very interesting, but this is before that. The events of the Iliad probably happened around 1200 BC, they think. Like, Hergos gave the Spartans their law about 400 years later. So basically, you've got a big party with the 1200 BC equivalent of frat boys, all wrestling and throwing discus and throwing javelins and probably doing some other things, trying to prove that they're the best choice to be the king of Sparta. Odysseus apparently had already met the woman he wanted to marry, and if I was any good at this, I would have looked her name up. It's on the tip of my tongue. I'm not going to butcher it. I'll put it on the screen. He had already met her. He knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, so he wasn't real interested in the whole Helen of Sparta thing. I think as things got closer and it looked like Menelaus was going to be the victor, Odysseus suggested to Menelaus that he make all the other princes agree that they would honor the marriage. There were probably a couple different reasons for this, but that was an important detail, and it's part of the reason they all went to war. I think that when Odysseus made that suggestion, he did not foresee where that was going to go. I think he was just trying to set things up so that none of the other guys would try to move in on Menelaus' territory and take Helen to the Spartan throne. As the story goes, what ended up happening was a Trojan prince named Paris. When Paris was born, there was actually a oracle that he was going to cause the downfall of the city. So his parents agreed to have him taken out into the wilderness and abandoned. So they gave him to someone, they took him out into the wilderness. That person took pity on him, and I think they raised him. They either raised him or they gave him to someone else. I don't remember that detail. Either way, Paris grew up in the woods, and one day he was not messing with. One day he was herding sheep, and according to the mythology, three Greek goddesses came to him and they put a contest in front of him. They asked him some questions, and the result of that was he was told he would marry the prettiest woman in the world. A little bit later, he happens to go back down to Troy. He meets his parents. It gets revealed he's actually their son. Somehow they forget that there was an oracle that he was going to destroy everything, and so they welcome him back. Shortly after that, he's gifted two ships, and he's sent out to make, I think, trade agreements with other city states. He goes to Sparta, and Menelaus is gone. So I don't know if Paris seduced Helen or if Helen seduced Paris or it was a mixture of the two. But it wasn't just about that he took her from Sparta, because he also took all of Menelaus's stuff. He took his wealth. And back then, there may have been some coinage, but a lot of people's wealth was in things like livestock and just goods that you had around the house. So if somebody had like a treasure room, it was probably full of things like cups made out of gold or other metal and things that were crafted. It wasn't just coins. It certainly wasn't paper dollars. It was not fiat currency. So when Paris took Helen from Sparta, he also took all of Menelaus's wealth. He took it back to Troy. As events unfolded, Menelaus got home, figured out what happened, talked to his brother Agamemnon, who was the king of Aegea. And because everyone had agreed to honor his marriage, they were obligated to help him get Helen and all his stuff back. And I don't think they were all happy about that, but they had agreed to it. So it's a long story. There's a lot of details that happened. But the end result is everyone who had that obligation followed through on it. A couple of the people, uh, I believe Diomedes and Achilles, it had actually been their fathers that had set up the agreement, but they followed through on it. This is an interesting bit. Odysseus and Menelaus actually went to Troy as part of a delegation to try to negotiate not just Helen's release, but Menelaus wanted his stuff back. The Trojans refused. So, and I don't know what happened to that wealth once Paris got back to Troy. Whatever, however, if that was distributed or if it was just the fact that Paris had it, it was tempting enough, and the Trojans were secure enough in their wall that they felt like they were safe from a Greek invasion. So they denied Menelaus's request. They denied the delegation, and they decided they would rather go to war than give up Menelaus's stuff and his wife. So the Greeks invaded. And I guess I won't spoil it for you if you haven't read the book. But there are a lot of interesting characters, and there's a lot of things that, especially if you've seen the movie Troy and you haven't read the Iliad, you do not know the story. So because I hate spoilers, I'm going to stop the story there. If you want to know more, go read the Iliad and then read the Odyssey. They're both really good. I do recommend the Robert Fagles translations. Those were translated specifically to be very readable because Homer, as it was presented, Homer wasn't really designed to read, it was designed to listen to. So if you want to read it, I really like the Fagles translations. They're not as dry as some of the other translations. All right, so now you know why the Greeks invaded Troy. It wasn't just about a pretty face. It was about stuff. Go read a book.